The topic that was been suggested and which I'm going to cover is contours of India's net zero ambition. I think we in India were surprised, and so was the rest of the world, when Prime Minister in Glasgow last year did commit India to achieving net zero by 2070. Now, to get a sense of how important this is, one only needs to look at some of the facts which were articulated by the IPCC in the COP event which has just ended in Sharm el-Sheikh. So as of now, global warming is at 1 degree. The frequency of extreme weather events is rising, and the intensity of these extreme weather events are rising, and they're experienced across the world. As of now, if nothing changes radically, we are set to cross 2.8 degrees by 2100. And survival of the human species on that event is highly unlikely. The IPCC has not said it so dramatically, but my view is that survival of the human species is then highly unlikely. The 2 degrees goal which was set in Paris is nowhere near the horizon. And the time for restricting global warming to 1.5 degrees is rapidly disappearing. And 1.5 degrees is going to be pretty bad. 2 is going to be very bad, and 2.8 is end of all of us. Now, the gravity of this has not yet sunk into the consciousness of leaders across the world. And I think it needs to sink in. Now, getting to 1.5, the window of opportunity is shrinking, but we can get there if everybody moves very rapidly. I won't go into the international debate on this issue, but clearly the responsibilities on the advanced industrial economies to get to net zero as quickly as possible, prepone 2050 to 2035 or 40, if there is to be a chance of achieving it. But I will focus my remarks on India. The first thing that I would like to say is that we in India tend to underestimate our ability to achieve major transformation. Our level of confidence and ambition is a bit lower than objective factors would warrant. So I'll come to the power sector itself. Around 2002-03, the International Energy Agency's reports used to say that we had the largest number of people on the planet without access to electricity, 400-500 million those days, and we would achieve in providing full access somewhere between 2040 and 50. 2050 in business as usual, 2040 better than business as usual. And then I recalled preparing the reply to an unstarred question in Parliament, where we said that Bihar, at the ongoing pace of village electrification, would take over 700 years to take electricity to all. And then fast forward 2005, we had a national program on village electrification, household electrification. We electrified 100,000 villages in about 6-7 years. And before the last, by 18-19, the Prime Minister was saying that we've taken electricity to every household. So that's India's capacity to do big things. So on moving towards net zero, I think we are underestimating our capacities. Now, I personally believe that we should have the national ambition of getting to net zero in 2047, the 100 years of our independence. That national ambition, we may or may not succeed, but will certainly accelerate our transition to becoming a globally competitive green economy. And we could probably achieve it, and we could probably afford it. But lacking that ambition, of course, we will be nowhere near that. Now let's look at what the journey to net zero means. I mean, what it means in India and what it means to the rest of the world. So there are two trajectories which are well settled. One is decarbonization of electricity, and in parallel, the electrification of as much of the economy as possible. So you have on one trajectory of electrifying as much of the economy as possible, and the other trajectory of decarbonizing electricity. Now, these two trajectories are now affordable. Now, this is a very major statement. Now, this is not sunk into people all across the world, because the traditional position has been that there are huge costs to decarbonization, and therefore a developing country like India cannot afford it. We have a right to develop and use fossil fuel because that's what the rest of the world did. Now, there has been a paradigm shift in terms of technologies and costs. Now, this is not sunk in adequately. So let me give you the numbers which our SECI got in response to its bid about 2 years back for renewable energy plus storage. So for renewable energy in the daytime, or when the wind blows or the sun shines primarily, because it's both sun or solar based, the price was 2.88 paise per unit. And for the time when the sun is not shining off peak, it was rupees 6.12 per unit for the first contract, 6.85 rupees per unit for the second contract. And this is about the tender which is 2-3 years old. And the average, therefore, turns out to be lower than the price of electricity from any new coal-fired station. And therefore, it makes no commercial sense to start work on any new coal-fired plant anymore. Now, obviously, we can do it because we have to stand up to the West, or we have the right to build coal-fired plants, but economic logic does not warrant the creation of a new thermal plant. Now, in this, there are a couple of minor arguments which are made by many people and which have merit, and so I thought I would talk about them. One is that these bids were for 4 to 6 hours of supply of stored electricity at night. So it's not enough to meet all the stored electricity needs to meet demand when the sun is not shining. Now the solution clearly lies in creating more storage, because if at 6.12 you can get storage, you can get multiples of 4-6 hour storage capacities and meet the entire demand. And this is when last year, when we had mild shortages, the exchange prices were shooting closer to 20 rupees, and the government clamped and said more than 12 rupees you cannot have spot prices of the electricity exchange. And the price of generating electricity from imported coal today, where coal in the international market is $300 a ton, or from imported gas, which again is astronomically high, most states in India would prefer to have load shedding rather than burden their discoms with such expensive power. And we see what is happening in Europe. Electricity prices are 6 times, 8 times, 4 times. People, not poor people, because they don't have really poor people, but ordinary people are struggling whether to sleep with 2 blankets like us or, eat less, etc. It's a kind of hardship which they have not seen since World War II. So, it does not make commercial sense for us to build new coal-fired stations. Now, the second argument that is made is that we need thermal power for grid stability, flexibility. Because we'll get solar energy when the sun shines, we get wind when the wind blows. There is no flexibility, and demand moves up and down during the day, during the night, and we need that flexibility. Now, if we go into storage technologies, they all offer you as much flexibility as thermal plants do. So the most standard storage technology around since the middle of the last century, if not earlier, which is pump storage. Now, pump storage is in hydro plants. You pump up the water when you get spare electricity, and it comes down and generates electricity when you need it. We haven't developed enough of pump storage as we should have, but the potential is 93 gigawatts as identified by the Central Electricity Authority. The number could be higher. And we have a Purulia pump storage plant working very well in Bengal. It's a mature technology, it's a standard turbine, and it gives you as much ramp-up capacity and flexibility as you may want. Historically, India used to get more than 50-60% of its electricity from hydropower. And this was the great Nehruvian era where all the hydro potential of the country south of the Vindhya was developed, except those that were interstate disputes, as in the Narmada case. And this was also the great days when we did so much in irrigation and power generation, and one united ministry of called the irrigation and power. Thermal power came after that. The second storage technology, which is not yet in mainstream consciousness across the world, is concentrated solar thermal, storing the sun's rays through mirrors in molten salt, from which you can generate electricity through a normal steam turbine at any time of the day. Now here again, technology has moved very fast, costs have come down, and only the other day the first such unit of a large plant in, I think, Dubai, UAE started providing electricity to the grid. The contracted price for this electricity, if I remember correctly, is around 7 cents a unit, which makes it as more attractive than imported coal-based thermal. So we could develop any number of these plants for storage. What is being promoted globally is battery storage, which is, in my view, should get the lowest priority. And the technology is yet to evolve for large-scale grid storage. But we should get there also. So if storage works, then for India, all additional demand of electricity can be met through renewables plus storage. And at some point of time in the future, we could consider decommissioning our thermal capacity, but that's way down the road. I mean, not in the next 15 years or so. And with our PLI kind of schemes and other schemes, we could also try to be self-reliant or Atmanirbhar in the manufacturing of all that is required for storage, and therefore be a little secure in terms of external shocks, as the world has seen following Ukraine. Now, the key to this transition is immediate commencement of lots of plants for storage. Because if storage gets commissioned by 24-25, then all those who believe that we can't manage without coal will see that we can actually manage without coal. Because right now, the dominant mindset is we can't manage without coal, we need thermal power for grid stability, peaking need is the right, and so on and so forth. Now, all that will wither away only if storage is there by 24-25 and we start seeing the results. Now, efficient contract management should give us pump storage by 24-25, it should give us CSP with molten salt by 24-25, because our capacity to execute projects in India has caught up with the rest of the world and we can do it pretty fast. But I see the challenge today as being that decision makers in government need to be persuaded that please start work on storage with a sense of urgency. And if we don't do it, then even Prime Minister's 2030 goals of 500 GW of non-fossil fuel capacity would either be unattainable or it would be attained with considerable waste of investment, because if you don't have storage, then this daytime solar power generation will create problems, because you will either have to back down thermal or this will have to back down and it will not generate the electricity it can. So if the 2030 goals of 500 GW of non-fossil fuel capacity is to be achieved, then we need to succeed on storage right now and become a global leader in storage. Now, if you look at the global context, California wants to be net zero in electricity by 2035. President Biden had said before he became president that he wants the US to be net zero by 2030 in electricity by 2035. He's nowhere near that because the president of the US is awfully internally as he's in the rest of the world. And then you have European countries which want to be zero by 2035. So clearly they see that this is feasible, technically as well as affordable. So to sum up, we can meet all our additional power demand from renewables plus storage. We need to begin work on storage as soon as possible, grid scale storage. If we do that, we'll be global leaders on grid scale storage. And if we are successful and meet all the additional demand, including peaking demand, with reliable 24/7 power supply, then in the next decade will be the right time to start discussing and thinking about winding down the existing thermal capacity. Now, winding that down will have huge costs, so we should be aware of it because all coal mines will go, coal royalties to the coal producing states will go, the existing NTPC and all the other private generators will have to start winding down, and we will then face the political economy problem of entrenched or existing dominant players not wanting to wind down and trying their best to defeat winding down. I think one of the reasons why the rest of the world has not moved rapidly enough in terms of decarbonization of their economies is the enormous power of the energy companies. I mean, the US is a good example that the Republican Party is still not persuaded that anything needs to be done on climate change. I mean, if I were a climate activist in US, I would be encouraging young people to meet every Republican senator and congressman at every airport and public event with placards saying, for heaven's sake, wake up. Now, the other stream would be the stream of electrifying every section of the economy. Now, fortunately for India, we are beginning to see a rapid transition, which I had not thought I would see so soon. So if you look at two-wheelers, and India, sells more two-wheelers than bicycles. So roughly 50% of the two-wheeler market is already with EVs. And I have met, people who were driving these two-wheelers. They're just too thrilled at how cheap it is. 3 units, somebody told me in a two-wheeler you could do 130 kilometers or something in one charge. I am a very satisfied owner of a Tata Nexon EV, which I've had for 6 months, and my wife can't believe that we're spending practically nothing on fuel. And then I was there in Pune the other day, and I was received at the airport by a Tata Nexon EV, dropped by Tata Nexon EV, 2 highly satisfied drivers. So India's transition to e-mobility is probably taking place pretty rapidly and may end up being faster than the US. Because in the US, they all want cars which want to drive, across that huge country. Here we are very happy if we can drive around our city. And if transport gets electrified, it's a huge chunk of fossil fuel usage which goes to electricity, which in parallel is getting decarbonized. The railways anyway have said that they will be net zero by 2030. So railways anyway were electrifying fully even before all this happened. So you have four-wheelers for transport as well as railways as well as two-wheelers getting more or less fully electrified in this decade. Now the big challenge used to be about buses and trucks. Now again, India has surprised the world with this big tender which ESL brought out for electric buses, 5,000 buses, running cost less than diesel. Now, that hasn't yet sunk into the consciousness of decision makers across the country, because it did. Then a policy decision would emerge that we will not buy any more diesel. And maybe it doesn't happen this year, but it happens in 24, 25 again, then we are through, because buses have a life of 4 years. So around 2030, 35, one can see electrification of huge chunks of the economy which are dependent on fossil fuels and transport, and in parallel, decarbonization of electricity. So these two things happen by the mid-30s, then we are really on track to get to zero very quickly. We don't have to wait till 2070. Now let's look at those sectors of the economy which cannot be decarbonized, which are not easily, decarbonized, which cannot be electrified. Now these are big segments and they are called hard to abate sectors, but here we are at par with the rest of the world. But nobody else has achieved very much. And given the low costs that we have in technology development as well as deployment, there is no reason why we should feel that we cannot move as fast as anybody else in the hard to abate sectors. We have an advantage that we have capacities to create while the rest of the world has to convert existing capacity. So we even have a theoretical advantage over China in terms of creating fresh capacity at lower costs than decommissioning existing capacity or recreating existing capacity. So that's a late mover's advantage which we have in theory, provided we make full use of it. Now, in terms of technology, the rest of the world is looking at hydrogen as the way to solve the problems of the hard to abate sectors. Now, my sense is that yes, you can do it for steel making, you can probably do it for fertilizer, maybe you can do it for shipping through the ammonia route. Airbus is developing a plane which would, by 2035, they hope would be ready using hydrogen. But there are lots of, other industries where right now we don't see hydrogen as providing the solution. But in the medium term, the solution would be either finding a technical solution or developing alternative products which will meet our consumption needs. I mean, the simplest example is a plastic bag vis-a-vis a jute or a cloth bag. I mean, we can make that choice. But the petrochemical industry is the chemical industry. There are technical challenges. I would not, say that globally the solutions are there. But the speed at which technology is moving, I am very optimistic that solutions would emerge and emerge quite rapidly. Now, we have been, again, here a little forward-looking, that for the first time we have decided to try and be at par with the advanced countries by announcing the hydrogen mission. Now, in terms of the hydrogen mission, I would like to make just 2-3 observations. One is green hydrogen for export. Now, if our large private firms can make money out of it, it's great. But green hydrogen for export, in my view, does not need any subsidy from government, because government resources are scarce. So government resources should go in what I would call the lowest hanging fruit, which is green hydrogen from bio-waste in the country. Then in mastering every bit of the production, storage and supply chain of hydrogen to begin with, because grey hydrogen is the same thing as green hydrogen. In parallel, making green hydrogen and then the downstream uses, because that is where the hard to abate sectors exist. So scarce government money should go to support pilot projects in, say, green steel making or fertilizer, etc., and at the minimum scale required to master the technology and discover costs. And that is affordable. When we began the National Solar Mission, what did we do? The solar power was 16, 17 rupees a unit. We still said we would do it. We began modestly, 50, 100 megawatts a year, did competitive bidding, and then in a few years, we reached a point where it neither needed cross-subsidy or direct subsidy. And I think 5-6 years. Of course, we were helped by Chinese success in reducing cost of solar panel manufacturing, but and again, with all the downstream uses of hydrogen, who knows who in the world will make breakthroughs in technologies and costs. Now, if that happens, say in the next 8-10 years, then in the middle of the next decade, we should be at par in terms of capacity to deploy green hydrogen for decarbonizing the hard-to-abate sectors. And the rest of the world is trying to move very fast. So I think last year probably Germany said they would want to be number one in the new hydrogen economy. I think $12 billion of euros were given as grants or VGF, viability gap funding, to about 62 private sectors for the entire supply chain or value chain. So we need to replicate that in areas where we think we can scale up quickly, where we could deploy. And we have now a good learning experience in terms of policies of how to promote something which is new and which could be desirable in the medium term and also become cost effective. So the electric mobility, FAME 1 and 2 have helped, and state governments also have come up with forward-looking policy. That has helped, and of course solar mission seemed impossible. I had the privilege of being government those days and being part of the design. And everybody felt it is out of the way. There's no way we can get to 22,000 megawatts by this year. And certainly there was no money in the government's budget to subsidize such a large program. It's happened. So I think we can do that in the hard-to-abate sectors also. And one factor which therefore I think needs to be kept in mind, that we need to think very carefully and caution the public at large and decision makers that please think very carefully about lumpy long-term investments which will lock us into the fossil fuel economy. So there is this goal of taking up the share of gas to 16% of our energy. Needs to be reviewed, because creating LNG terminals, international gas prices being where they are, and if transport is going to go towards electricity and imported gas makes no sense for generating electricity, then we need to think carefully whether we need that kind of gas. Similarly, if we look at gas for cooking, I think a few years down the road we need to create a debate as to how to shift to electricity for cooking. I have the privilege of living overseas and cooked excellent Indian food on electric, furnaces. Even chapatis turn out reasonably well and they become fluffy. So I don't see why we can't push electricity for cooking. And in terms of rural India, it makes great sense because the LPG cylinder is very expensive. And so many households have that as an ornamental piece because they can't afford to buy the cylinder. But if you nudge consumers to cooking with better induction stoves, etc., then that transition would happen. Because governments are committed to providing cheap electricity to the bottom of the pyramid. I mean, AAP is giving 300 units free, but others are also giving electricity at reasonably affordable rates. So, I therefore, as I think through these things, I feel 2047 doesn't appear that impossible or that daunting. And certainly 2070 is way too ahead. And we don't really need to think that we will start working on net zero only around 2040 and continue with the fossil fuel economy, then debate about how to wind down. I think we can do it now, and also market forces will push us. I mean, EVs are coming through as a result of market forces, and it's gathering momentum. And once it gathers momentum, you can't stop it. I mean, and the way things happen, let's recall. I mean, some of us were addicted to BlackBerry, but the firm is gone. And globally, what is happening is, and this is a political economy dimension that I think all of us need to recognize, that fossil fuel companies have been, announcing net zero by 2050. But they are doing nothing and they have no intention of doing anything in the 2020s. And they are persuading governments that, fine. And so the last few years, the progress in decarbonization of the advanced industrial economy has been far too modest. I mean, Germany took renewables to over 40% of electricity and then they're plateaued for the last few years. No reason for them to do it. I hope the collateral benefit of the enormous damage of the Ukraine conflict will be to push rapid decarbonization of electricity, at least in these economies. Because, I mean, there are technologies and projects on the drawing board where you could create artificial islands in the North Sea area, northwest of Northern Europe and above UK, where you could generate as much wind power as you want. And they are lucky because they get wind power around the day. We have to get solar power, which is only during the possibility. So the political economy or the power of large fossil fuel companies has prevented the West from making the transition which it could afford and it should have done earlier. And my sense is that this will start kicking into India as the share of renewables goes up from 10% of LXT to 20, 30, 40, 50%. So I see a tension in this decade between Prime Minister's goals of 2030 and what all the energy companies want, because it's in their rational interest to keep doing what they've been doing and growing and prospering. And it is very difficult for large firms to do a radical retransformation of themselves. I'm glad Reliance has announced those plans. I hope they succeed. But essentially, large energy companies face the choice between extinction or complete re-engineering themselves. And if you go by global experience, very few large firms have successfully done that. Look at Kodak, they've disappeared. BlackBerry has disappeared. So that's the political economy dimension which we need to be conscious of all the time. Because very often in our analysis we don't look at that, but we see how we push our agenda to look at that. Now, there are 2 points which are minor, but I thought I'd mention them. One is often one sees numbers from various think tanks that, you'll need so many $1 trillion or billions of dollars and so on and so forth. Now, I am one of those who believes, and I've seen in the last many, many years, that we live in a globalized economy where we live with global finance. So if somebody has a project which makes good business sense, and is a large firm, not a startup, then finances are not a constraint. So money comes in from the domestic market, from the global market, etc., both in equity and debt. And our success on the solar side has been driven entirely by a private investment in a competitive industry structure, and one keeps reading headlines that this bid price is too low and that the project will not get implemented. But all said and done, we've reached the levels we have with private money and private investment. And I remember hearing this argument very strongly in 2010 when the mission was being started. You'll get these bids, they will never put up the plants, they won't get the land, etc. And therefore we must seek large, bank guarantees. And I argued it's his money. We are only promising to give him LXT when he gives us LXT. Till then it's his risk. Why should we get into micromanaging about land or his efficiency? Some projects will drop out fine, it doesn't matter. We will buy what we get. So money is not a constraint. The other issue we hear is, it's a phrase which has been, part of our discourse for decades, of technology transfer. Now on technology transfer, the hard reality is that technologies are developed by private firms in the West. They have patent rights on them. And they're very happy to license production as well as create joint ventures and earn more money. And when you look at a final product like this kind of phone, the prices have fallen so much that we are not even aware of how much of that is going into the royalty on technology or the rental income on IPR. So I think we should assume that we are living in a globalized world where technology is available to us as much as it is available to anybody anywhere. So we are in a globalized world in this transition. And the final point is that, this DISCOM's financial health, I've been with this ever since I came to the power sector over 20 years back. My political economy take on this is as follows. It's a state subject, and I think the central government should accept that it's a state subject in reality, because efforts of doing anything from the center have not really gone very far. The second is, it is so important for a state system that the political executive will make sure that it doesn't sink. So they will, at the end of the day, find the cash or raise the tariffs or increase efficiency or whatever. So they will keep it afloat. But they also have the political compulsion of giving free electricity to farmers, Lifeline 300 units as AAP is promising everywhere, or other compulsions. So it's a tough political contradiction that they grapple with. And I think the mistake that the central government has done is to provide soft money in the hope that using soft money they will turn around, or banks and PFC, REC giving working capital loans where they should not be given because there is no business case for return of that working capital. So Power Ministry is now trying to be a little tougher with the states, which is a good thing. And then there are other issues where states can legitimately argue that, I mean, how come the central PSUs are so profitable, get 16 or 14% return? After all, the old Electricity Act gave 3%, SEB, the old Act of 48 gave 3%, private licensees used to get 5% return on capital. So I think, I mean, Coal India and the central PSUs are too profitable. That's a larger debate, I won't go into it here. So I think I've covered all that I wanted to cover, and I would again end up by saying what I began in the beginning, that we should have the ambition of becoming net zero by 47. We'll probably be able to do it. We can probably afford it. The ambition will benefit us enormously because we can then leapfrog over China to become a competitive, green manufacturing economy in the world. And again, decarbonization of the electricity system is now the cheapest way of meeting the additional electricity demands of our people. And sectors of the economy which are getting electrified save money because railways found electrifying railways is cheaper than running railways on diesel. Owners of two-wheelers are finding that it is cheaper. So on the whole, I think we are at a good inflection point, but the dominant mindset of the country is nowhere there. And one recommendation I made recently in an opinion piece is that as individuals we should be able to demand from our DISCOMs that you give us only green electricity on an aggregate basis and then on real-time basis. I think almost everybody in this room would choose to have that green electricity on real-time basis and maybe have one Starbucks coffee less or two Starbucks coffee less. And then we should start labeling what we buy in the market as consumer goods on the carbon content. This is a move in Europe. We should bring it to India as soon as possible so that we can try and buy something which is less carbon intensive. Maybe somebody would be happy to buy green steel in a building which is using everything else which is green, and maybe pay 5-10% more, or maybe even not more, because at the end of the day, smart builders and developers would find ways of keeping costs reasonable. Because I was pleasantly surprised when Suzlon told us they were getting their global award for a platinum complex in Pune many years back. I was fortunately present. And Suzlon promoters said that they found, I mean, they had the ambition of getting the award, but they found that they began on day one with that intention. Their costs were comparable with the costs of other people who were developing these campuses. So, it's a note of optimism.